My name is Adeline Vance, and for the last 32 years of my life, I have been a ghost, a quiet presence, a pair of capable hands, a secret keeper. By trade, I am a seamstress, a word that feels both ancient and insufficient. I don't just hem trousers or fix zippers. I understand the soul of a garment. I know its architecture, the way a specific thread can either hold a dream together or allow it to unravel. My sister Ilara is the opposite of a ghost. She is all light and noise, a supernova of ambition and charisma. She is the founder and face of Elysian, one of the trendiest new fashion brands to explode onto the scene. To her, my work, my entire existence is, in her own unforgettable words, tragically behind the scenes. She says it with a little laugh, a dismissive wave of her hand, as if I'm a charming but dusty relic she keeps in the attic. She has no idea that the attic is the most important room in the house. She doesn't know that this quiet, tragic ghost has been very, very busy. Tonight is her first major runway show, the culmination of her life's work, a spectacle funded by a dream she thinks is entirely her own. What she doesn't know is that I am the anonymous investor who has been quietly buying up not just shares, but the very foundations of her world, the textile mills, the dye houses, the supply chains. I am the silent partner who now owns a 60% majority stake in her brand. Tonight, I will watch her triumph from the front row, wearing a dress of my own creation, and she will finally see the ghost. Before I tell you how a simple seamstress orchestrated the quiet takeover of a fashion empire, I want to connect with all of you who are watching. Go ahead and let me know in the comments where you're from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your contribution dismissed while someone else took the credit, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe because this channel is a community for people who know what it's like to fight for your own story. Now, let's get back to that night, the night the seams of my sister's world were about to be ripped wide open. Our story, like most stories of complicated sisterhood, began in the cramped, sunlit space of our grandmother's sewing room. It was a magical place, smelling of machine oil, ironing steam, and old, treasured fabrics. Ilara, even as a child, was the visionary. She would sit for hours with a sketchbook, her tongue stuck out in concentration, drawing fantastical dresses with impossible silhouettes. She drew princesses and movie stars, filling pages with her vibrant, chaotic energy. I, on the other hand, was the builder. While Ilara sketched, I sat at our grandmother's knee, learning the language of the needle. Grandmother Elena was a master tailor from the old country, and she didn't just teach me to sew, she taught me to respect the craft. "A drawing is a wish, Adeline," she would tell me, her voice a soft, rumbling whisper. "But the stitches, they are the work. They are the truth. Never forget that the strength is in the seams." Ilara would flit in and out, holding up a drawing. "Nonna, Addie, look, can you make this for my doll?" And I would. I would take her two-dimensional dream and give it form, structure, and life. I'd puzzle over how to make a tiny satin sleeve puff just so, or how to create a skirt that would twirl with the right amount of drama. Ilara would clap her hands in delight, play with the doll for an hour, and then forget it, moving on to her next grand vision. I would be left with the tiny, perfect garment, a testament to my patience and her fleeting passion. The dynamic was set. She was the idea, and I was the execution, the face and the hands. Our parents, bless their hearts, saw only the sparkle. Ilara's artistic temperament was a source of constant pride. Her dramatic moods were indulged, her messy sketchbooks treated like sacred texts. My quiet, meticulous work was seen as a useful, if unglamorous, hobby. "It's wonderful that Adeline has something to keep her busy," my mother would say to friends over coffee. "She's so practical." Ilara, of course, is the dreamer. They didn't see that dreams are weightless without a practical foundation to land on. They bought Ilara expensive art supplies and enrolled her in summer design camps. They bought me more thread. It wasn't malicious. It was a kind of blindness, a cultural worship of the visible talent over the invisible skill. I never felt jealous of her drawings, but a quiet, persistent ache settled in my chest, the ache of being fundamentally misunderstood. The only person who truly saw me was Grandmother Elena. When I was 16, I spent an entire summer creating a replica of a 1940s evening gown from a photograph. It required intricate beadwork, a complex internal corset, and a bias-cut skirt that had to drape like liquid. My parents were mildly impressed. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. Are you wearing it to the school dance?" Ilara glanced at it and said, "The waist looks a little bulky." But my grandmother, she approached it with the reverence of a curator. She ran her gnarled fingers over the seams, her touch so light it was like a whisper. She examined the hand-stitched beadwork, the perfectly aligned pattern on the silk. She looked at me, her dark eyes shining with a profound understanding. "This is not a hobby, Adeline," she said, her voice firm. "This is mastery. Some people build bridges, you build beauty. It is the same work, the same integrity." In that moment, I felt seen in a way that would have to sustain me for many years. When she passed away 2 years later, she left the bulk of her modest estate not to her own children, but to me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. The letter from her lawyer was simple: "For the builder, so she may build her own house." My parents were confused. Ilara was indignant for about a day, but I understood. It wasn't just money. It was an instruction. It was the key. While Ilara went off to a prestigious design school in New York, a flight funded by our parents taking out a second mortgage, I stayed home. I took a job at a high-end bridal boutique doing alterations. It was meticulous, demanding work. I was the ghost in the back room, fixing the mistakes of famous designers, making their $5,000 gowns actually fit a human body. The brides would cry with happiness in the mirror, thanking the boutique owner, never knowing that a girl named Adeline had just restructured the entire bodice of their dream dress. I saved every penny. I lived simply, poring over financial news at night instead of fashion magazines. During this time, I met a man who would change the trajectory of my life. Mr. Arthur Sterling was a widower whose daughter was getting married. He came in with her for a fitting, a quiet, observant man with eyes that missed nothing. The dress was a designer disaster, beautiful but structurally unsound. I spent a week reworking it. When he came to pick it up, he didn't just thank me, he asked me questions. "How did you solve the problem with the tension in the bodice?" he asked, genuinely curious. "You didn't just alter it, you re-engineered it." We talked for an hour. It turned out he was a retired venture capitalist. He saw the same thing my grandmother had, a mind that understood structure. He became my unlikely mentor. I would show him my savings, my meager investment portfolio, and he would give me advice, teaching me the language of a world I'd never been exposed to. "Think of it like a pattern, Adeline," he'd say. "You don't just buy the prettiest fabric. You buy the mill that makes the fabric. You control the source." Meanwhile, Ilara graduated with a mountain of debt and a portfolio of brilliant, unproducible designs. The real world was a shock to her. No one was waiting to hand the dreamer a fashion empire. She was frustrated, angry, and her phone calls home were full of laments. "No one gets my vision, Addie. They want commercial garbage. They don't understand art." She moved into a tiny shoebox apartment and took a job fetching coffee for a designer she considered a hack. It was during this period of desperation that the idea for Elysian was truly born, and it was also when her condescension towards me crystallized. To her, I was the symbol of the safe, boring life she was terrified of. I was the failure, the one who stayed behind. "I can't end up like you, Addie," she said once during a particularly bleak phone call. "Just sewing. It's so tragic." The word tragic hung in the air between us, a little shard of glass. I didn't say anything. I just let it cut. A year later, she called me, breathless with excitement. "You are not going to believe this. An investment group. They found my portfolio online. An anonymous angel investor. They want to fund a capsule collection. They said I have a singular voice. Can you believe it?" I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. "That's wonderful, Ilara. They're wiring the money next week. It's happening, Addie. It's finally happening. What she didn't know was that the anonymous angel investor was me. Guided by Arthur, I had used a small portion of my grandmother's inheritance to create AV Holdings, Adeline Vance Holdings, and made my first move. I believed in her talent. I truly did. But my investment was not an act of sisterly charity. It was a strategy. I was buying the pretty fabric, just like Arthur said, but I was already making plans to buy the mill. The first Elysian collection was a moderate success. It got a little bit of press, and Alara's confidence soared into the stratosphere. With that confidence came an ever-thickening layer of entitlement. She was the creative director, the visionary, the star. The success in her mind was proof of her singular genius. She never once asked about the specifics of the investment, about the people behind it. She was content to believe that the universe had simply recognized her greatness and paid its dues. She even hired me for some of the more complex sample work. She'd FedEx me the fabric and a sketch, and I'd work late into the night, constructing the architectural pieces her regular sample makers couldn't figure out. She paid me a pittance, less than what I made per hour at the bridal boutique. It was insulting, but I accepted. I needed to be close to the process. I needed to understand the mechanics of the business I was secretly funding. One afternoon, she called me in a panic. "Addie, I need you. The new silk charmeuse we're using for the spring collection is a nightmare. It's like sowing water. My team has ruined 3 mock-ups. Can you handle it?" I knew the fabric well. It was from a small, family-owned mill in North Carolina, one known for its quality but also for its temperamental weave. "It needs a specific needle size, a French seam with a very light tension, and you should probably use tissue paper to stabilize it during the feed," I told her calmly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "How do you know that?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. "I work with fabric all day, Alara," I said, my voice even. "It's my job." "Right. Of course. The tragic behind-the-scenes stuff," she said with a little laugh, the suspicion vanishing, replaced by her usual casual dismissal. "Well, whatever. I'm sending it overnight. I need it back by Friday." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, and felt that old, familiar ache. But this time, it was different. It was mixed with a cold, hard resolve. That evening, I called Arthur. "It's time to visit North Carolina," I said. Over the next 2 years, while Alara was being photographed for fashion blogs and attending industry parties, I was on a quiet pilgrimage. Using the name Ms. Vance from AV Holdings, I visited the mills, not as a designer, but as an investor. I didn't talk about vision or aesthetics. I talked to the floor managers about their machinery, to the weavers about thread counts, to the owners about their legacies and their debts. These were businesses built on generations of knowledge, struggling to compete with overseas manufacturing. They were the heart of the industry, and they were dying. Elysian was one of their bigger new clients, but Alara, in her typical fashion, constantly pushed for lower prices and faster turnarounds, blind to the strain she was putting on them. AV Holdings didn't just offer them capital, we offered them partnership. We invested in upgrading their looms, in funding apprenticeship programs to pass on their craft. We paid a fair price for their goods. In return, AV Holdings acquired a stake in their business. First, the silk mill in North Carolina, then a heritage wool supplier in Vermont, then a specialist dye house in New Jersey. I was re-engineering the supply chain one thread at a time. I was building my house. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place last year. The initial investors in Elysian, the ones who had joined my anonymous seed money, were getting nervous. The brand was growing, but it was volatile. They wanted to cash out. Alara was in a panic, terrified her dream was about to collapse. She was told that a major textile conglomerate, one of their key suppliers, had seen the brand's potential and was interested in buying out the other partners and becoming the majority shareholder. Alara was ecstatic. To her, this was the ultimate validation. A huge, established company wanted in. It gave her brand prestige, stability. She boasted about it to our parents at Christmas dinner. "They're a silent partner, of course," she said, swirling her wine. They handle the boring stuff, the textiles and production, so I can focus on the vision. It's perfect. She looked across the table at me. I was thinking, Addie, maybe I could get you some contract work through them? I'm sure they need people who can sew. My father beamed. Did you hear that, Adeline? Your sister, always looking out for you. I just smiled and took a sip of my water. The major textile conglomerate, of course, was AV Holdings. My holdings. I wasn't just the builder anymore. I owned the whole damn street. The show, which was announced a month later, wasn't just her launch into the major leagues. It was my coronation, and she had no idea. The phone rang 2 weeks before the show, the shrill sound cutting through the quiet hum of my sewing machine. It was Alara, and from the frantic edge in her voice, I knew this wasn't a social call. Addie? Thank God you picked up. I am in a full-blown 5-alarm crisis. I took a slow breath, picturing her in her sleek, minimalist office, probably pacing a hole in the polished concrete floor. What's wrong, Alara? It's the finale piece, the showstopper. It's a disaster. My head seamstress just quit, said I was an unreasonable tyrant. Can you believe the nerve? And the rest of the team is completely swamped with the main collection. This piece is everything, Addie. It's the exclamation point on the whole season. It's incredibly complex, all structured folds and internal boning. No one can get it right. You're the only one who can do this level of, the grunt work. The casual, thoughtless sting of her words was so familiar it was almost comforting. The grunt work. The invisible, essential labor that held her entire glittering world together. For a moment, a fierce, hot wave of anger rose in me. I was tempted to say no, to tell her to find another ghost to fix her problems. But then, a different thought, cool and clear, settled over me. There was a beautiful, terrible poetry to it. The centerpiece of her triumph, the garment that would define her career, would be physically built by my hands. It was the perfect final stitch in my secret tapestry. I'll do it, I said. A whoosh of relieved air came through the phone. Oh, thank you, Addie. You're a lifesaver, a literal lifesaver. I'll pay you, of course, double my usual rate. I don't want your money, Alara, I said, my voice perfectly level. The silence on her end was immediate and heavy with confusion. What? What do you mean? I want a ticket to the show, I said. Of course. I can get you a ticket. Standing room probably, it's totally sold out, but you'll be in the building. No, I said, the word a small, hard stone. I want a seat. A seat? Addie, it's a front row seat. The silence this time was glacial. I could hear the gears turning in her head, the shock, the annoyance, the disbelief. The front row? She finally sputtered, her voice a mix of a laugh and a scoff. Be serious. The front row is for Anna Wintour, for the editors of Harper's, for the buyers from Neiman Marcus. It's for important people. It's not for... She trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. It's not for you. I understand, I said calmly. It's your choice. Front row, or you can find someone else to fix your finale gown. I had never, in our entire lives, given her an ultimatum. I had always been the one to yield, to accommodate, to shrink. The shock of it jolted her. I heard her take a sharp, irritated breath. Fine, whatever, a front row seat. It's insane, but fine. My assistant will email you the ticket. Just, for the love of God, don't wear something you made yourself. Try to look chic. And then she hung up. I stood there, holding the silent phone, and a slow smile spread across my face. Don't wear something you made yourself. Oh, I would be wearing something I made myself, and it would be the most important garment I had ever created. For the next 2 weeks, my small apartment transformed into a sacred workshop. By day, I worked on Alara's finale gown. The fabric arrived in a massive box, a custom-milled iridescent organza that shifted from pale lavender to icy blue in the light. It was a fabric from the North Carolina mill, one of the first new weaves developed with the funding from AV Holdings. Touching it felt like touching a piece of my own secret history. I laid the pattern pieces out on my cutting table, and as I worked, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I wasn't just her sister, the fixer. I was the owner, assessing the quality of my asset. I saw the genius in Alara's design. The ambitious sculptural folds were breathtaking. But I also saw the flaws. A structural seam was placed at a stress point that would inevitably pucker under the stage lights. An amateur mistake, born of a designer who never had to actually construct her own creations. Without a word to her, I adjusted the pattern, shifting the seam by 1/4 of an inch and reinforcing it with a nearly invisible strip of silk tape. It was a tiny change, a ghost's edit, but it would make the difference between a beautiful dress and a perfect one. I sewed with a surgeon's precision, each stitch a quiet declaration of my own mastery. By night, I worked on my own dress. This was not a job. This was a confession. I chose a heavy midnight blue silk crepe. It was a fabric with weight, with history. It didn't scream for attention like Alara's iridescent organza. It absorbed the light, creating a depth that was almost black. The design was the opposite of everything Elysian stood for. Where Alara's clothes were trendy, deconstructed, and loud, my dress was timeless, structured, and quiet. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a simple column skirt. Its drama wasn't in its shape, but in its construction. I used techniques that were centuries old. The shoulder seams were hand-rolled and impossibly fine. The darts were so perfectly placed they were invisible, creating a flawless silhouette that seemed to be sculpted from the fabric itself. The only embellishment was a single intricate line of black jet beading that I hand-stitched along the neckline, a subtle constellation against a midnight sky. It was a dress that would look simple to the uninformed eye, but to anyone who truly understood clothing, a designer, a tailor, a fashion historian, it would be a testament. It was my resume, my thesis, and my declaration of war, all stitched into one. It was everything I was, quiet, strong, and tragically, beautifully behind the scenes. The day of the show arrived, a blur of gray city sky and nervous energy. I delivered the finale gown to the backstage entrance of the venue. The place was a hive of chaos, models rushing past, publicists shouting into headsets, racks of clothing being wheeled at dangerous speeds. I found Alara in the center of the storm, her face pale with stress, a headset askew on her perfectly styled hair. "Addie, give it to me!" she snapped, not even making eye contact as she grabbed the voluminous garment bag from my hands. She barked an order to a terrified-looking assistant. "Get this to dressing room 1 now!" She finally glanced at me, her eyes scanning me up and down. I was in simple jeans and a t-shirt. "Good," she said, nodding curtly. "You're blending in. Just try to do that tonight, okay? Stay in your seat. Don't talk to anyone." "I won't," I said, and it was the truth. I didn't need to talk. My presence would be enough. She was already turning away, shouting about a lighting cue before I had even finished my sentence. I was dismissed, a ghost once more. I went home, showered, and began the slow ritual of getting ready. As I slipped my dress on, the heavy silk felt like armor. It settled on my shoulders, cool and reassuring. I did my own makeup, simple and elegant, and pulled my hair back into a severe, polished chignon. I looked at the woman in the mirror. I didn't see a seamstress. I didn't see Alara's sister. I saw the CEO of AV Holdings. I saw my grandmother's legacy. I saw a builder who had finally, painstakingly built her own house. Just before I left, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur Sterling. He was already at the venue, waiting for me. "Are you ready, Adeline?" It read. I typed back a single word. "Yes," he replied instantly. "Good. Remember, you aren't just watching the show. You own it. Every thread, every bulb, every share. It's all yours." His words were the final layer of steel I needed. I took one last look in the mirror, my heart a slow, steady drum against my ribs. It was time to go to the show. The venue was a cavernous, converted warehouse in the meatpacking district, its industrial bones dressed up in swathes of white fabric and dramatic, theatrical lighting. The air thrummed with the specific high-pitched frequency of the fashion world, a blend of expensive perfume, air kisses, and palpable ambition. Photographers' flashes popped like fireworks near the entrance, capturing influencers and celebrities in their borrowed plumage. I bypassed it all, my name, Adeline Vance, on a different list. I walked to the front entrance where a woman with a clipboard and a severe haircut guarded the gateway to the inner sanctum. "Name?" she asked, her eyes flicking over me, her expression a perfect mask of bored disdain. "Adeline Vance," I said. Her eyes scanned the list. She frowned, then scanned it again. "Ah, yes. Here you are, Ms. Vance. Right this way." The surprise in her voice was a small, satisfying spark. She clearly couldn't reconcile my simple, unbranded elegance with a front-row seat. She led me past the rows of lesser mortals, down to the polished white runway, to a seat marked with a small, discreet card. A. Vance. I sat down. Next to me was an empty seat, reserved for Arthur. Across the runway, I saw the faces I had only ever seen in magazines or on my late-night research binges. The editor-in-chief of a major fashion publication, her signature bob like a helmet. The head buyer for a legendary department store, her expression famously inscrutable. A few seats down from them, I saw my parents. They were beaming, practically vibrating with pride. My mother was wearing an Elysian scarf from a past season, a flag of her allegiance. She caught my eye and gave me a tight, bewildered little smile and a tiny wave, as if to say, "What on earth are you doing down here?" I just gave her a calm, unreadable nod in return. A moment later, Arthur arrived, a picture of quiet distinction in a perfectly tailored suit. He sat beside me, gave my hand a brief, reassuring squeeze, and then turned his attention to the runway, a silent partner in every sense of the word. The lights began to dim. A hush fell over the crowd. The low, pulsing beat of the music started, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. The show was beginning. The first model stepped out, and the collection unfolded. I had to admit, Alara's talent was undeniable. The clothes were bold, exciting, and captured the zeitgeist perfectly. There was a raw energy to them that was all her. I felt a strange, dual sensation swell within me. There was the pride of an owner watching her investment perform, a cool, analytical assessment of the product. The jackets were strong, the dresses would sell, but underneath it, there was a flicker of something else, the ghost of sisterly pride. She really is good, I thought, but my eye, the eye of a maker, also saw the tiny imperfections. A hem on a chiffon dress that was machine-stitched instead of hand-rolled, giving it a slightly cheaper finish. A pucker near the zipper on a pair of tailored trousers. These were the details Alara didn't see, the corners she cut in her pursuit of the big picture. They were the invisible flaws that only I, her silent structural support, would ever notice. Then, the music shifted. The beat slowed, becoming more dramatic, more focused. It was time for the finale. The crowd leaned forward in unison. A single spotlight hit the entrance to the runway. The finale model emerged, wearing the dress. My dress. Or rather, Alara's design, brought to life by my hands. The iridescent organza drank the light, shimmering with an ethereal, otherworldly glow. It moved like a living thing, the sculptural folds I had so carefully constructed holding their shape perfectly as the model walked. The seam I had moved was flawless, creating a clean, unbroken line that made the model's waist look impossibly small. It was breathtaking. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I heard the woman next to Arthur, a famous fashion critic, whisper, "My God, that's a work of art." I felt a quiet, profound satisfaction settle deep within me. I had done my work. The truth was in the seams. The model completed her walk, and the venue exploded in thunderous applause. The lights came up, and Alara stepped onto the runway, her face a mask of euphoric, tear-streaked triumph. She was wearing a simple black dress, letting her creation be the star. She drank in the adoration, bowing, her hands pressed to her heart. She looked like a queen accepting the worship of her subjects. The applause finally died down, and she took a microphone. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all so much for being here. This collection, this is my soul. I have so many people to thank." She went through the list. Her PR team, her design assistants, her supportive parents, who were now openly weeping with joy. "And of course," she continued, her voice ringing with sincerity, "I have to thank our incredible investors. The partners who believed in my vision from the very beginning and the silent giants who have given Elysian the foundation to truly fly. Your faith in me has been my greatest gift." Her eyes swept across the front row, a beatific smile on her face. Her gaze passed over the famous editor, the powerful buyer. Then her eyes landed on me. For a split second, her smile faltered. A flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance crossed her face. It was the, "What are you doing here?" look, magnified 1,000 times by the public setting. Her eyes darted away from me as if I were a stain on her perfect moment. They landed on the man sitting beside me, Arthur Sterling. She didn't know him personally, but in her world, a man with his bearing in that seat was someone of consequence. Arthur, feeling her gaze, gave her a polite, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. He was no longer just a spectator, he was a participant. The fashion critic next to him leaned towards the head buyer. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read her lips. "That's Arthur Sterling." The buyer's eyes widened slightly. She looked from Arthur to me and back again, noting our quiet, comfortable proximity. The whisper began to travel down the row like a lit fuse. "Sterling represents AV Holdings, the textile group that owns Elysian." Ilara's smile was now frozen in place, a brittle facade. She saw the whispers, the shifting glances. Her gaze snapped back to me, really looked at me, as if for the first time all night. She took in my dress. Her designer's eye, no matter how clouded by ego, couldn't miss the truth of it. She saw the impossible perfection of the shoulder seams, the masterful cut, the quiet, expensive weight of the silk. It was a garment of a quality that her own atelier couldn't produce. Her eyes, wide with a dawning, horrifying confusion, flickered from my dress to my calm face to Arthur and back again. A. Vance, a V Holdings. Adeline, Vance. The pieces of the puzzle, which had been scattered across our entire lives, began to fly together in her mind with dizzying, sickening speed. The grunt work, the impossible alterations, the knowledge of fabrics, the sudden demand for a front row seat, my grandmother's inheritance. It all crashed together into one monstrous, unbelievable truth. The blood drained from her face. Her breath hitched in a tiny, audible gasp. The thunderous applause was still echoing in the vast space, but for Ilara, the world had gone completely silent. She was staring at a ghost, and for the first time in her life, she truly saw me. The applause eventually faded, and the crowd, buzzing with the energy of the show, began to rise. People swarmed the runway, eager to congratulate the triumphant designer. But Ilara didn't move. She stood frozen, a statue of porcelain, her eyes still locked on me. I simply held her gaze, my expression neutral. Arthur and I remained seated, a small island of calm in the churning sea of people. A few minutes later, a frantic young assistant with a headset pushed her way through the throng. "Ms. Vance?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Ilara, she's asking for you, backstage. She said it's urgent." "Of course," I said, rising smoothly. Arthur stood with me. "I'll wait for you out front," he said quietly, giving my arm a final supportive squeeze. I nodded and followed the assistant away from the glittering crowd, into the stark, utilitarian chaos of the backstage world. She led me to a private dressing room, a small, white space now filled with an atmosphere of crushing tension. The celebratory bottle of champagne sat on a table, its foil still intact, sweating in the warm air. My parents were there, hovering awkwardly. My mother was trying to soothe a shell-shocked Alara who was slumped in a chair, staring at her own reflection in the makeup mirror. "Darling, what's wrong? You were magnificent! Everyone is saying it's the show of the season," my father boomed, completely oblivious. Alara didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes darted up and met mine in the mirror's reflection. "You," she whispered, her voice a raw, ragged sound. "It was you!" My mother stopped fussing. "What is she talking about, Adeline?" I ignored her and spoke directly to my sister's reflection. "Yes, Alara. It was me." Alara slowly turned in her chair to face me. The confusion on her face was curdling into a dark, sputtering rage. "A V Holdings," she said, spitting the name out like something foul. "Adeline, Vance. How? How could you do this? Why? Is this some kind of sick, twisted joke? A pathetic revenge plot because I didn't fawn over your little sewing hobby?" "It was never a hobby," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight that silenced the room. "And it isn't revenge." I took a step closer. My parents looked back and forth between us, their faces masks of utter bewilderment. "What is going on?" my father demanded. "This is a private business matter, Dad," I said, my gaze never leaving Alara. "Alara, I believed in your talent. I still do. Your designs are brilliant, but a business built on brilliant designs alone is a house of cards. It needs a foundation. It needs structure, integrity, things you don't see." I let the words hang in the air. "You talk about your vision, but you have no vision for the people who make your dream possible. The weavers, the cutters, the finishers. The people in the mills you were bankrupting with your demands for cheaper and faster. You call their life's work boring stuff. You call my life's work tragic. But that is the foundation, Alara. The behind the scenes is the only thing that's real. I didn't just invest in your brand. I invested in the supply chain. I secured the foundation. I protected the craft. My craft. Their craft. I did it to protect my investment. And since I now own 60% of this company, I am, by definition, the most important investment there is." The color that had drained from Alara's face returned in a hot, mottled flush. She was speechless, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. My mother finally found her voice. You own Alara's company? Adeline, that's impossible. You're a seamstress." "Yes," I said, turning to look at my mother for the first time. "I am. I'm also the person who has been signing your daughter's checks for the past 3 years." "And you," I said, my voice losing its sharp edge and softening with a deep, old sadness. "You both never once called to ask me how my business was doing. You never asked about my work, my life. You only ever called to ask if I could hem Alara's trousers for free, or to tell me how proud you were of her, or to ask if I could get you tickets to her show." They flinched as if I had struck them. The truth of my words, so plainly spoken, was more brutal than any shouted accusation. In the crushing silence that followed, Alara finally broke. She let out a dry, choked sob and buried her face in her hands. The magnificent creative director, the supernova, had collapsed. The entire glittering, celebrated structure of her life, her identity, was built upon, and now wholly owned by, the quiet, tragic sister she had spent a lifetime looking down on. The ghost had just inherited the house. A few months passed, a strange and quiet season of restructuring, both corporate and emotional. The world of fashion, which thrives on gossip, had been alight with the story. The reclusive, unknown owner of AV Holdings, the powerhouse behind Elysian, was none other than the designer's own sister. I never gave a single interview. I let the work speak for itself. I was officially named CEO of the parent company that now encompassed Elysian and the associated mills. My office wasn't the sleek white box Alara had designed for herself. It was a warm, functional space at the heart of our garment district production facility. From my window, I could see the trucks delivering bolts of fabric from my mills. I spent my days not in design meetings, but in strategy sessions with Arthur, on calls with logistics managers, and walking the floors of the factories. I implemented fair wage policies, profit sharing for the mill workers, and started an apprenticeship program named after our grandmother, ensuring the craft she treasured would be passed on to a new generation. I was building a company with integrity from the ground up, with strong, honest seams. Ilara was still the creative director. I never considered firing her. Her talent was too valuable an asset. But the dynamic between us was irrevocably altered. She was humbled, adrift. Her entire sense of self had been built on the idea of her singular genius, and that foundation had been dynamited. Our relationship became cautiously professional. She now had to present her seasonal budgets and design concepts to me and a board for approval. I remember the first time she came into a board meeting. She was visibly nervous, her usual bravado replaced with a tentative uncertainty. She laid out her sketches for the next collection, her voice quiet as she explained her vision. The designs were still brilliant, but there was a new maturity to them, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. When she was finished, she looked at me, her eyes wide with apprehension, waiting for my verdict. "The designs are strong," I said, keeping my voice even and professional. "But your proposed fabric budget is unrealistic. You've spec'd a silk from Italy that will shred our margins. The mill in Vermont can produce a merino silk blend of a similar weight and drape for 30% less, and it's a more durable fabric. Redo the numbers with that in mind and we'll approve the concept." She just stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." It was the first time she had ever thanked me for my structural input. It was a small, fragile beginning. About a month later, she asked if she could visit the North Carolina mill with me. I agreed. We flew down together, the silence in the small plane thick but no longer hostile. Watching her walk the floor of the mill was a revelation. She touched the raw cotton, watched the ancient looms clatter and weave, and listened as the floor manager explained the delicate process of creating the organza for her finale gown. For the first time, she was seeing the behind the scenes. She was seeing the people, the labor, the history. That evening, as we sat on the porch of the small inn where we were staying, she finally turned to me. "I get it now," she said softly, not looking at me but out at the darkening fields. "All my life, I thought the drawing was the only thing that mattered. The idea. I never thought about this. Any of this." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I was a monster to you, Addie. I know that. I was so insecure, so terrified that my one talent wasn't enough, that I had to make you small so that I could feel big. I am so sorry." The apology, when it finally came, wasn't dramatic or tearful. It was quiet, exhausted, and real. I didn't offer her a hug or easy absolution. The wound was too old, too deep for that. But I gave her a nod of acknowledgement. "We have a lot of work to do, Ilara," I said, "on the brand. And on us." The healing wasn't complete, but a new pattern had been chosen. The first stitches of a stronger, more honest design were being made. Looking back on it all now, I realize I never set out to get revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. My plan was cool, structured, and strategic. I didn't want to destroy my sister. I wanted to build a world where my own value and the value of the work I respected was non-negotiable. I learned that true power isn't about being the face on the magazine or the name on the label. That's just marketing. Real, lasting power is in the foundation. It's in owning the machinery, the resources, the skills. It's in understanding that the most beautiful dress in the world is nothing but a flimsy wish without the strength of the seams that hold it together. My sister called my life tragic because it was behind the scenes. But I've learned that's where the real story is written. The spotlight is fleeting, but the structure, if you build it right, can last forever. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been a long and complicated journey, but sharing it has been a part of my own healing process. I'd love to hear from you all in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated in your life or career only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story, because every single one of them deserves to be heard. And if my story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it can make a bigger difference than you know. Remember, Your worth is not determined by whether or not other people see it. It exists in the work you do, in the integrity you hold, and in the quiet strength you build when no one is watching. Thank you for joining me.